welcome back to Sisterly. Thanks for joining us, and for all of you who have been listening to our first few episodes. It's been so exciting to get your feedback and hear what you're relating to. If you want to interact with us some more, please give us a follow at SisterlyPod on Instagram. We post fun content on there related to the podcast and just related to life.
Yeah, thanks so much to everyone who's been listening. We're so excited to have you back for another episode. We're really excited about today's topic. We kind of came up with this idea actually from one of our listeners who said, I'd love to hear about your work experiences. And Rebecca and I kind of wanted to take it a step further to talk today specifically about some of our early work experiences and how that's been instrumental to our view of ourselves and the working world ever since then. So we're going to specifically be focusing on kind of the early days, which in my opinion are some of the worst days and some seriously big learning moments.
Traumatic work experiences.
Yeah. And I think for all the women listening out there, I think we've all experienced the challenges that come with being a woman in the workforce. Um, and I think in some of those early jobs, if you start working when you're younger, you experience it the most and it really stays with you for the rest of your life. So just starting out talking a little bit about my working experiences, I was very determined from a very young age to start working. I've always wanted to be independent beyond my years. I wanted to be in college when I was 13. I wanted to start working as soon as I could and make my own money. So when I was 16, I got my first job at a local country club with my best friend, Rachel. We wanted to work together for the summer. And what basically ended up happening was a summer of just
Chaos.
What basically ended up happening was a shit show summer, not to give too much away too early. But basically, what I thought was going to be happening was I was going to be working at the snack bar, which I thought, fantastic. I'm going to sit here all day and serve the children their, lemon pops, and I'm going to get free ice cream, and it's going to be pretty casual. I mean, sounds like a good gig,
Sounds
right?
ideal.
And then what ended up happening was I basically had better behavior than a lot of the other teenagers that were hired. Basically, I just wasn't fucking around like some of the other
Like I was
high
doing my
schoolers.
job.
And so, yeah, doing the bare minimum of just, doing my job. So I got moved to the kitchen. And I was in charge of the salad and sandwich line. There was like an actual chef there that was in charge, but when she wasn't there, it was basically me in charge of the salad and sandwich line. Rachel jumped in there too. And it was my first ever experience working in a kitchen, and it was a very man dominated space and male focused kitchen. So I'm sure people out there have heard what it's like to work in a kitchen. But it was basically kind of as bad as you would expect. There was I was talked down to a lot. I was made to feel pretty small a lot of the time, not only by the actual, head chef in charge, but by other, teenage boys who were working there with me who just kind of weren't put in check at all. They were kind of just allowed to do whatever they want. I was criticized constantly. I was told not to talk so much, that I talked too much, that my voice was too loud. I think some of the guys thought they were just like teasing me or joking around, but it got to like a pretty ridiculous extent. Like at one point I was chased into a closet by one of the kitchen guys holding a knife.
Cute.
Fun times. I remember I mentioned on an earlier episode that I'm the queen of like wrong place, wrong time. And I remember people in the kitchen started throwing ice at each other. So we're throwing ice at each other, whatever. I'm like joining in. And of course I hit someone in the eye with an ice cube. God help me.
That would happen to you.
It would happen to me. He ended up being fine, but just, never join in an ice fight. Okay. Don't do it. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I mean, there were a lot of things too that it was just, I was made to feel like I wasn't as good as other people in the kitchen. I always wanted to work the register. Rebecca knows this. My whole life, all I've ever wanted to do was like work at a cash register or be a
Literally,
secretary.
we had, like, this Barbie cash register as children that, like, we would play, like, either grocery store or whatever, and Olivia always wanted to be the clerk. She loved that little, like, microphone button that you could, like,
Yep.
talk into, like, "Spill on aisle 3," like, Olivia was all about it.
Yep. And I loved like putting the numbers in, getting your change, all
Right,
that
dealing with the
jazz.
cash.
I don't know what that says about me as a person, but I loved it. But I was told like I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to handle it. It was too busy. Uh, And another thing about the field club that was very interesting is it was like a summer job, a summer location, right? So sometimes like things ebbed and flowed. If you had a rainy day in the summer, no one was there. There was no food to make. So I would bring a book with me. So I would prep all the food, I would clean my station, and then there was no one at the club. I'd like read my book what else am I supposed to be doing here? And like I'd already done all my prep work, and I remember like that was a huge issue. Meanwhile, all of the other guys that I worked with were making vines in the kitchen, like throwing stuff around. Like they got those little plastic trays and slid on them down the stairs. Like that's what they were doing. I was reading my book.
You're like, "I'm just
Okay.
reading my book in the corner, leave me alone."
I'm like, I'm literally causing the least amount of chaos in this kitchen, and somehow I'm still being harassed. So, um, and it was tough. I mean, I remember feeling really beaten down, just like constantly underappreciated. Of course, I'm making minimum wage, as you know,
Most
most
16-year-olds
teenagers
do.
are. Yes, I'm like barely making any money. Um, I'm being treated poorly, and I just felt like no one really understood. A lot of times too, like I remember telling my parents that it was like such a shitty job, and a lot of times people will just be like, it's your first job, like you kind of just gotta push
Right, they're like, it's
through,
like a rite of passage almost to be like, "Oh,
yeah,
yeah, you gotta work in this, like, awful condition so that you never wanna work in it again," pretty much. It's like, "Alright."
yeah. And then I remember at the end of the summer, Rachel and I talked to her mom about what we were experiencing, because Rachel experienced a lot of it on her own too, and she was like, no, this isn't okay, like
Right, this isn't normal.
no, this is not normal. And that was definitely like for the first time a validating feeling that whole summer. I was like, oh, okay, this isn't how I'm supposed to be treated in the workplace. But it was just a shame because it was like after the summer was already over, after I had dealt with all of that for, you know, 8, 10 weeks.
So, my first ever job was babysitting. I started doing that, I think, when I was maybe 12, and I did it sort of throughout middle school and high school, and that was great. I mean, you just get paid to hang out with kids, and all the kids I watched were relatively easy, so there was no harassment or issues there. But then I went to college, and my first job there was I would actually sit in the dorm kind of like lobby and just check guests in and then give people
I
their
remember
spare
that.
keys if they lost them, which feels like a relic now because I imagine that most people today just have digital something to get into their room, maybe a keypad, but we had actual literal keys and you only got one, and if you lost it you had to like go to the front desk and check it out and you had to pay for a new one, and so I was the person being like, right, sign for your spare key. um which that job was pretty fine because I mean it was minimum wage and my boss was also kind of psycho, but I got to sit there with my big sister from my sorority, shout out Jocelyn, and we got to just hang out, and when no one was around I just did my homework, so not a bad gig. And then throughout college, I was just sort of a French tutor. I tutored a girl who was in high school who did homeschool. I worked in a lab doing kind of data entry and filing, which was endlessly boring, but it was a job to do. So that was fine. But it was really my first job out of college that felt like sort of a real job or like a real corporate job where I was a paralegal in New York City at a big law firm. And that was sort of my introduction to a true sort of work setting. because all my other jobs had just been at school or babysitting. And I remember I had my own office, which at first I thought was very cool, but it was a windowless room that was pretty much like closet size, maybe slightly bigger, but it had no windows, a very thick wood door. And I was just in there by myself all day. And when I started this job, I also received almost no training whatsoever. I was trained on like how to log into my computer and save documents to a system and use my email, but that was pretty much the extent of it. I wasn't really trained in the other databases we used for research or how to do time management or anything like that. I didn't have a supervisor either. Everyone in our group just came to me directly to request work. So I didn't really have a person to check in with to ask if things were normal, if I was doing okay, what I should be doing when I had a question. And from what I understood, typically what happened is there would be overlap. So the person before you who was leaving would train you before they left, but that didn't happen for me. My person had already left. So I just showed up and they were like, all right, just start doing this job that I had no idea how to do. So a lot of just learning on my feet, trying to figure it out. And as I said, this was my first time in sort of a corporate setting and my first time understanding a corporate culture. And what I would come to learn, I thought was a pretty bad culture, at least in this place. And my first experience was sort of a boys' club mentality or old school comments about appearance or things like that. I once had an older partner tell me that I was wearing a really attractive sweater that day, which I found very strange and I did not
What
know
does
how
that
to
even mean?
right. I was just like, thank you. I really didn't know how to react to that. And that same partner at another event once told me that he found it really unattractive when women put their lipstick on in public, like around other people.
It's supposed to
Again,
be secret. No one's supposed to know you're putting the lipstick on. It's just supposed to
right.
be
It's
there.
supposed
It
to
ruins
be
the illusion.
hidden. I was just like,
Secret
okay,
lipstick.
right, secret lipstick. I did not know how to react to these kinds of comments. I was like, why do you think this is a thing you need to say? I don't understand, but okay. So, just my first exposure to things like that and also my first experience with more of a rigid social hierarchy. Law firms have, partners, senior associates, junior associates, paralegals, secretaries, all sorts of other random support staff. And it was interesting to observe how people got what treatment they received based on their role in the firm. Um, so as a paralegal, I was like fairly low on the totem pole, and especially as one who had just entered as a new college grad. Um, so it was interesting to see how people treated me versus how they treated people they thought were more important, or versus how they treated people they thought were less important than even me. I used to get emails from people that were just only in the subject line, "Come to my office now," or "Send me this document now." Like nothing in the body of the text, no thanks, no like address to me, just come now. Like, oh, I've been, I've been
It's
summoned.
like
All
someone
right.
snapping at you via
Right. I'm just
email.
like,
It's
get
like,
over
yeah,
here.
come on.
Like, all right, here I come. Um, just my first interaction where I felt like courtesy sort of just went out the door, or people
Mhm.
just didn't treat you as if you were human sometimes. It was just, get
Yeah, you're
over
just like a
here.
means to get stuff done. You're not an actual like treated as a contributor to the workplace.
Right. And it was just very bizarre. And I found myself getting really just like salty. I would find myself at work just sort of thinking to myself, like, who do these people think they are? Like, why are they allowed to talk to me like this? And it would make me a little bit shorter sometimes with people. And I would find myself getting almost a bit of an attitude, which I don't think I
Mhm.
normally have that much of an attitude. But I was just like, I was getting very indignant about being treated like I could just be summoned and talked to in this way. And it became clear that this was just sort of what people expected and nobody else was sort of taking an issue with it. And I was like, all right, I guess like this is just like, well, what I need to do. But I found myself very put off by it constantly. And I would find myself aligning myself a lot with like the secretaries because
Mhm.
they were also treated like crap a lot, and they knew a lot, especially as a new person. I didn't have a supervisor. No one's freaking training me. I would just
They knew all
try
the
to
hot goss.
right, they know all the tea, and also they just know how to get things done. They know how to reach the partners, they know what their
Mhm.
preferences are, and so I would just hit them up and be like, "Hey, like, what do I need to do here? Like, I haven't reached so and so. Do you have any idea where they are?" And they would be just so much friendlier to me, and I just made an effort with them, and then they would make an effort with me. And I remember I would always come into the firm and I would say hello and good morning to the guys who worked at the security desk, and you want to befriend those people because sometimes you forget your
Yeah.
security badge and they're like, you know what? It's okay, Rebecca. We remember you. Go ahead inside. I'm like, thanks, guys.
It just pays to be friendly to people. Just say hello and good morning, and it means so much. And
It
typically, when
does.
you're at the bottom of the totem pole, people just don't think that they have to give you that courtesy.
Yeah,
And it's such a bummer.
exactly. So those are most of my early job experiences. I feel like I learned a lot about what I do and do not like in the workplace, and sort of a taste of what corporate life is like after having not ever really having to engage in it.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you wanna talk about any more you had other work
Yes, there was one
experiences as
more I
well.
did want to talk about. Some interesting high school working experiences. The next one I wanted to talk about was, my senior year of high school. I wanted to get a job kind of more during the school year, so I started working at a frozen yogurt place. Now let me tell you, the froyo industry is whack. Especially back in the day, like 2013, 2014, when it was at its prime. Also, there's nothing more that, frankly, like, white people love than froyo. Like, it just seems to like,
Particularly in 2013 and 2014. I don't know why, but it was like no
it's
one had ever
like
heard of it before.
it's like, first of all, ice cream is better than froyo. So the
Hands down.
fact that froyo became the it food was ridiculous. Also, it's just like another thing people can tell themselves that they're eating healthy, and then they put
Right.
like gummy bears and brownie bites on your froyo. Like, just enjoy it. Stop trying to have a healthier alternative. Anyway, I could go on about that forever. But the froyo industry is crazy, and the people who ran the froyo company I work at also wild people. And I remember I started and they basically told me that they needed to train me before they really let me work. It's like,
I remember
okay,
this.
um, I understand, needing to be trained. I thought maybe, I go in for a shift and instead of really working that shift, I'm trained, right?
Right, you like shadow
Um,
someone, learn the
yes.
ropes.
Because how much do you really need to learn about working at a froyo place? It's
Right.
pretty self-explanatory. And I also had already worked in a kitchen before. Like, I had some idea of
Right, you're
how
like,
a
this isn't
kitchen
my
ran.
first rodeo.
What ended up happening was I got completely taken advantage of. I worked without pay for 3 weeks. I remember they wouldn't give me a t-shirt, like a company t-shirt because I was still in training, which made no sense. I was like, "Just give me a t-shirt. Everyone's gonna be confused what this random
Right, they're
girl
gonna be
behind
like,
the
"Are you
counter is
serving
doing."
me or what? Who are you?"
Once again, wouldn't let me use the register. What's with people hoarding the register? It's really not that complicated, and I had been practicing since I was 6.
Right,
I
you were
was
born
made
for
for
this
this.
moment.
Um, yeah, so they didn't pay me for weeks, and then, I mean, probably the experience that I'll never forget is, I worked at a place. I don't want to say the name, not that this is ever going to get anywhere. But the logo was a frog, and they made me dress up in the frog costume with another worker, and they made me stand out on the street and just wave at people as the cars drove by. And this is like a mascot frog costume, right? I had a giant head, a giant frog
I can't
head
believe I
that
never
hurt.
saw it. It really
I
pains me that I missed it.
I mean, I think the lucky thing for me was is, like, I didn't know I had to do that, right? Like, I just showed up one day and then I was like, "Ah, yes, put the frog costume on." I can't remember if I did it more than once. It felt like I did it a million times because it was so horrendous. But yeah, I just had to stand out there. I don't even remember if we had a sign or if I just, like, stood outside in a frog
Just
costume
hopping
and, like,
around, hopping and bopping.
waved. Also, shout out to anyone who has to wear a mascot costume because those heads are heavy. They're heavy and it's very warm in there. I ended up only working at that place for those, for a few weeks because I ended up getting a different job where the people were very nice to me and
Didn't make you dress up as a frog.
didn't make me dress up as a frog, were willing to pay me in a timely manner, which was wild, and give me a t-shirt. But I remember I quit the frozen yogurt place. I actually quit because I couldn't work a certain shift. And we had like a group chat with all the people who worked there, which feels interesting and
Seems weird,
unprofessional.
yeah.
And I said I couldn't work. And then I got basically yelled at, screamed at via text in front of all of the other coworkers that I wasn't available to work a certain shift. I remember it was like the end of my senior year. I had a bunch of stuff going on. Like, you have banquets and you have graduation prep and all that stuff. And, I'm like, this is what you get for hiring 17-year-olds who you're also not paying. What motivation did I have to work? I had seen no
Right.
money. So I remember I quit and I had just gotten a t-shirt too. That was rough. It was like the day after they gave me a t-shirt finally and I quit, but they still hadn't paid me. And I remember my dad actually went in and
I was
got the
gonna say,
money for
didn't
me.
dad go with you to be
N-
like,
I didn't
listen,
even
you just
go.
used unpaid labor of my daughter for 3 weeks
Yeah, I
or
didn't even
however
go.
long.
And this was probably, I would say, the most helpful time in my life it was to have a dad who's a lawyer because he just like walked in, got my paycheck and just like came home and gave it to me. And it was like, I mean, it was like $300 maximum. Like it wasn't even that much money, but as a kid, that felt like a lot of money.
Right, you're like, I put my time into this. Show me the money.
It was also just ridiculous. Like, that's not how the working world works.
Also, in what world can you just be like, yeah, it's training. We don't pay you for that. Like, no, you hired me. I'm training for my job on the job. Like,
Right.
you pay me for all
And
of
it's like,
that.
I'm a teenager, so I'm like, all right, like it's better to work a few shifts unpaid than find a different job.
Yeah.
Um, but anywho, what a bummer that turned out to be. I know I've said bummer a lot, but I don't really know how else to describe it because I was so excited to work at a froyo place. It was like
Right.
the best place to be. It was the
Let
froyo
down.
summer of the season. Anywho, a few years later, that place is closed. All the other froyo places are pretty much closed because everyone realizes that it's just not worth it. There are better treats. And also the industry is crazy. One thing I'll say before I wrap up the froyo topic is I remember one time I had left the froyo mix that you would like put into the machines. I had left it out on the counter for a second and I got yelled at because they were like, "What if someone sees what froyo we're using?" And I was like, "I'm sorry. How many people are out here trying to get the inside scoop on what froyo you use?"
Right.
Like, are
Like, wait,
people
what brand they use?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's like the FBI yeah, they didn't want the brand name to be known. I'm like, "Is the FBI, like, tailing you, trying to figure out what brand you use? Is this like a super secretive brand?" Like, I'm guessing you use the same generic one that everyone else uses.
Right.
Wild. Also okay, sorry, one more thing. I really could talk about them forever. This froyo place also had a weird religious connection.
Oh, to what?
Yeah,
Scientology?
yeah, I remember the name had, like, a secondary meaning that, like, tied it to God,
Oh.
um, which I could speak about that forever, but I think there's just the natural question of what ties Froyo to God, and I think we could just leave it at that.
Deep questions to consider.
Because that's
What
fucking
ties
insane.
Froyo to God? All right. And on that note,
If anything, I would think God would say, "Just eat ice cream," but
yeah.
whatever, that's my personal opinion.
Oh my gosh. So those are some early job experiences that Olivia and I experienced. Different settings, but equally wild and provided interesting first job life lessons. And we wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the insecurities that we got after those jobs or the challenges we faced from those jobs and how those sort of carried forward into future job experiences or current job experiences, and then touch on sort of what we learned from that, and what we wish we had known sooner, and what we use in our current jobs to fight sort of those insecurities and challenges.
So one thing that really stuck out to me the other day when I was scrolling on Instagram, I actually saw it on one of my friends' stories, and it said, I might be not quoting this entirely correctly, but it basically said trauma doesn't make me a better person, but it does make me funnier. And that is something I really relate to, especially with my early job experiences, because there are a lot of things looking back that I can realize were incredibly inappropriate in a workplace. And I don't think I'm better for having to deal with those things. I think I laugh at a lot of them now because it's better for me personally, it's better to laugh at things than to think too much about the negative. But um I looking back at it now, I can really see where some of my larger trends in the workplace now, how they all lead back to some of my earliest job experiences.
Mhm.
Um, as I therapize myself with absolutely no qualifications. But some of the things that really continue to pop up for me in the workplace is the idea that a man would never care to hear my opinion or take a chance on me in the workplace. I mean, I think we can tie that back to a lot of things. I don't think it's necessarily just work, but a lot of the men that I've worked with in the past in my job experiences have really not given me the time of day. And I know that's not the experience for everyone by any means, but that happened to me a lot very early on in my career. And it's been really challenging to feel like I can be taken seriously, especially when men would tell me my voice is annoying.
Mhm.
Don't talk so much. It makes me feel like my voice is purposeless and more of a nuisance than a benefit. Um,
Especially when you're 16 or 17 years old, you're still a child, and
right.
men who are older than you, or who are somehow given more authority than you, or just take up the authority themselves, are telling you this.
100%. And it wasn't even always necessarily the bosses in those situations. It would be my fellow coworkers, fellow high schoolers who would say these things to me, but no one said anything.
Right, there was no accountability or consequences
Right.
for them saying something, and that kind of comes off as approval,
It's
or
okay.
like
Right.
stamp of approval that, yep, they're right, that you can talk less because there was no consequence for them saying that.
Yep. Another thing that comes up for me a lot is the idea that I have to be working constantly or my work is invaluable. Um,
Mhm.
and this came up a lot for me, when I was working in a kitchen and it was like you need to constantly be working. And listen, I'm not trying to say that you should just do no work and be lazy or
Right, take
anything
lots of
like
breaks.
that. But right, like I mentioned, there was a lot of downtime. There were days we didn't have a single customer. So I prepped all my food, I washed my station, and then when everyone was messing around, I read my book quietly. And I didn't make vines. I wasn't, chasing people with knives.
For the, Gen Zers listening in, Vine
Yeah,
is basically TikTok, but old.
but old. It's for the older people.
Yep, and
Um,
it didn't have as many fun dances as
it was also
TikTok
what, 6
does.
seconds,
Yeah, it was only
I
6
think?
seconds, yep.
Yeah, so it was a little
RIP
different,
Vine.
but it's very Rip Vine was very popular back in the day. Um, yeah, those people actually fun fact, ended up getting fired for those vines at the end of the summer because management found
Really?
them. Mhm.
Well,
Management, like the
well,
management of the
well.
whole club found them, and they got fired. You know who didn't get fired and got asked back the next year? Me. They sent me, I didn't mention this, they actually sent me an apology letter. The other only woman chef in the, uh, kitchen sent me an apology letter basically saying, like, "The environment will be better next year if you come back," and I was like, "No, thank you."
You're like, "That's just a little too late."
Yep. It's like, been there, done that, in
Yep.
the words of Pitbull. Um
I forgot they got fired. That's good.
Yeah, they did. It was like, justice.
Delayed justice, but I'll take
Delayed
it.
justice, yeah. Um, so yeah,
Um,
and just quickly wrapping up basically it just made me feel like my work wasn't actually very valuable, that I can't handle difficult things, right? I can't handle the register. It's too
Right. Too
challenging for my
complicated for your
brain.
delicate little fingers and your
Yeah.
poor, fragile female self. You can't handle this cashier register.
Yeah, and I think wrapping that up, it just led to a lot of imposter syndrome that I continue to deal with. Now I just feel like I can't do this. Why would I be able to? I can't handle hard things.
Mhm.
Um yeah.
Yeah, I had similar kind of feelings after my first jobs. I was worried about being dismissed or not taken seriously. I got concerned that I would be stuck in these kinds of environments where people talk so condescendingly or just so short, summoning me via email subject. Um, Also, I found that, among more of my peers and sometimes the paralegal like law firm type setting, that it felt like the exhaustion Olympics, like who was working the most, the longest, the hardest. Like if you weren't suffering or killing yourself at your job, that you weren't doing enough. Oh, I stayed up till 3 a.m. last night. Oh, I had to do this 3 days in a row. And that somehow being the metric for what was good work or what was working hard. And that's just not my scene. But you start to feel the pressure of when everyone else around you is kind of feeding into that environment, that, oh, am I supposed to be doing that as well? Am I doing something wrong?
Definitely.
Um, and then just like you were saying, some imposter syndrome of, do I know what I'm doing? Does everyone else know what they're doing? And I don't know what I'm doing. Why are the people around me seeming more confident than I am? Why do they seem to know what's going on and I'm not quite sure? Is it dumb to ask questions? Nobody else seems to be asking questions. Um, and I think I can sort of tie this into our next sort of topic, which is things that we learned and how we sort of deal with it now and how we've grown from those experiences. And I think that I've since learned that the panic of feeling like I didn't know what I was doing was a combination of not receiving adequate training, but also being too scared to ask questions and being nervous that that made me look like I didn't know what I was doing. And if I were to look back on myself starting out, I would tell myself, it's fine, ask more questions, make sure you really understand what a person is asking of you and that you understand the assignment. And one of the things I still use now is I repeat back to the person giving me a task what I think they've just asked me to do so that they can hear in my own words what I think I'm about to go do. And they can be like, yep, that's exactly what I wanted. Or, oh, not quite. No, I want you to do this. Because I think a lot of times people get a task and they're just like, yep, I got it. Great. I'll get started on
Mhm.
that. And they start doing it. And then as they start, they realize, I don't know if I really know what I'm doing, or I might be going down a slightly different tangent than what was actually asked of me. And it's better in that moment when you realize you're not quite sure to just check back in and ask so that you don't waste a ton of your own time doing a slightly offbeat task. This is obviously more of a like corporate office setting type of job, but a lot of times you just get sort of given tasks, you think you get what's going on and you sit down to start it and you realize, I don't quite get what's going on. Always worth it to check back in. Like even if a person acts like they're irritated, they're not going to be as irritated as if you give them back an assignment that took you 8 hours and it's not what they actually wanted.
Definitely. I've always found that it's just better to ask the question.
It's always better. I used to think that it made me look like I didn't know what I was doing or dumb or something, but it's always better to ask the questions. And I found in my current job that asking questions is so well received. And in fact, I'll be told, "Thank you so much for asking that question. I'm glad I
Mhm.
get to clarify it." Like people are more than happy to make sure that I'm actually not wasting anyone's time. Um so, highly recommend asking questions and not apologizing for it. And another thing that I feel like has been a big takeaway from my early jobs and also my current job as I'm getting older is I think the big difference as a woman in the workplace is sometimes just confidence level. And it's really hard because I think a lot of times society, the world, does not want us to be that confident. Like we're constantly encouraged to apologize, make ourselves smaller, question ourselves. But when I started my current job, I realized that the men who started at the exact same time that I did in their emails or in their calls would just sound really confident. They would just make statements and just with a period at the end. There was no question mark. There
No
was
question
no
marks.
exclamation point, like just checking in, like hope that's okay. If not, no worries, exclamation point. Like no hedging language. They just say things that as if they're fact. And people take them at face value. They're like, that person sounds confident. I believe them. And I would start off by hedging all of my language. I would say, I think XYZ, or it seems likely that, or it appears that, or overusing the word just. I'm just checking
Take the
in. I'm
justs
just,
out.
yeah.
They're
I've learned
never
that.
needed.
Someone told me that, and I was like, "You know what? You are so right." Every time I type in "adjust," I read back and I'm like, "Nope, it comes out. It comes out. It comes out. I meant what I said. I don't need to justify it." And the overusing exclamation points too. Hard habit to break because for some
I do
reason
it
it
all the
feels like
time.
we have to just add them all in there, or we sound angry, we sound hostile. But when a man does it, they're confident, they're sure, they know
Yep.
what they're doing. So I think an important lesson that I've taken away and that I keep trying to remind myself as I go forward in the workplace is to feel confident in my work, even if I don't feel as confident as I would like to. I remind myself that the men that I'm around often say things with full confidence, having
Mhm.
no idea if they're right at all. And so,
Fake
you
it
know
till you
what?
make it.
Fake it till you make it. As Michelle Obama said in her recent book, I have been at probably every powerful table that you can think of. And you know what? They're not that smart. And I think about that sometimes when I come into rooms where I'm like, am I qualified? Do I know what's going on? When I'm asked my opinion, do I need to hedge it? And I'm like, you know what? No, I'm just going to say exactly what I think because nobody else is hedging and questioning it.
I relate to a lot of what you said. I think it's very relatable to women in the workforce who've probably had very similar experiences to what we've had. I think it's something I continue to work through constantly. One thing I've been really lucky to have in the past few years is a lot of strong women leaders who have been incredible examples of what it's like to be a powerful woman in the workplace. And I really try to use that to my advantage. I try to treat them as mentors and ask questions, ask for advice when I'm nervous about a meeting or when something goes wrong, using them as a guide for how to bounce back. One thing that I think really helps me with my imposter syndrome is trying to be incredibly self aware about my strengths and areas of opportunity. I know that there are always areas for me to grow in, and I try to know what those are. I actually recently just had a review with my boss for Q3, and anytime they brought up an area of growth, I I was I knew that that was gonna be there, right?
You
I knew
weren't
we were
blindsided. You were
talking
like,
about it.
yes.
Yes, I was like, "No, you're right. I know this is an area that I can continue to grow in," and it actually meant it was a really good conversation because it there's no need to feel insecure about those things. I know that there's something there for me to work on, and so I'll continue to push forward in that, and then I think it actually allows me to feel very confident about my areas of strength.
Mhm.
I know I'm reliable, and that's hard because there were so many messages given to me early on in my career that there were people better to do it than me, right? Like
Mhm.
someone better to work the cash register, someone who could handle it better than I could. And I just have to continuously remind myself of the fact that I know I can do it. And a lot of ways I do that too is I ask for feedback constantly from my managers. And that's tough. It depends on who you're working with because sometimes you have
Right.
someone you really don't click with. When I was working at that country club, I probably didn't want any feedback. They were
Right.
mean.
You're like, "Do not need your feedback. Thank you very much."
Nope, I don't respect your feedback, so I don't want it. But in my current role, I like to ask for feedback, because also generally when you get feedback, it allows you to know what you need to work on, but generally people will give you some good feedback too, right? And then that helps and supports your confidence. um, in the long term. So those are just kind of some of the things that I work on. I think another thing that I continue to struggle with is just this idea that I'm not working hard enough. Um, this idea that there's always more to be done. And the thing is there's always more that can be
Right.
done,
The
but that
job
doesn't mean you
never
have to do
really
it right now.
stops, but
Right. It doesn't mean that it has to be done by you in the moment.
mhm.
And I have been told in the past that I set myself unreasonable expectations. And then I'm really mean to myself when I don't fulfill those because it was impossible to begin with. So I'm trying to get better at setting myself reasonable expectations so that I can celebrate my wins. But I
Mhm.
think I'm just used to this idea of I always need to be doing more. I always need to be working harder. Um, when that kind of doesn't get you anywhere and actually can just lead to
Right, burnout
burnout.
or yeah, or like less good quality work when you're just exhausted and demoralized for not reaching some unreasonable expectation.
Definitely. And I think we could talk about this and we could talk about this forever because there have been even more work experiences I've had since those in the beginning, but I think it's the first couple that always stick with you the most.
Mhm.
And
When
because
you're
it's
so
basically
impressionable and it's your
Mhm.
first time.
And it's your the first messages you receive, right, about that
Right.
skill set because one day you just enter the workforce, right?
Right.
And it's like one day it just begins, and if the first things you're told when you start is, you know, in different way of saying it, but basically you're worthless or your work is not great, it doesn't build a great foundation for later on in your life.
Mhm.
And I think what's just important if you are someone who's working in a job right now where you feel like those are the only messages you're receiving, if there are ways to check in with yourself about how valid you think the remarks made to you are.
Mhm.
Do you think they're actually coming from a place of your work performance, or do you think they're coming from a place of um, unfair power dynamics, um, you know, inhospitable work environment? And it's hard because, of course, I would love to say, if that's the case, leave. And I know that that's not the case
Right,
for
not
everyone. You
everyone can
can't,
just up and leave a shitty job, but
right? But trying to be kind to yourself, knowing that it's not all you,
right.
I think is really
Remind
important.
yourself of your strengths, what you bring to the table, and where you can seek out mentors, people who you actually respect and trust, who could maybe give you better feedback. Well, that's all we have today on our early job experiences, what we learned. Um, Hopefully, this was interesting for you or you had things that you could relate to. If you want to share your job experiences with us, what you've learned from them, or anything else that you related to on any of our other episodes, please feel free to email us at sisterly.contact@gmail.com or DM us at our Instagram at sisterlypod. Feel free to follow us there. If you feel so inclined, we're now on Apple Podcasts and you can follow us there. You can also give us a rating and leave us a review. We'd love to know what you're liking and what you think and what you'd like to hear more of. And we'll catch you on the next one.